Hey everybody. This is a follow-up to some of my earlier videos on the DJI Phantom 4 Pro drone. And in the other videos, I've mentioned some great concerns about the image processing that DJI is doing. And in this video, I'm actually showing that although they have some issues with their image processing, you can still get good video and a good final output using it. In the earlier video, I used the D-Log color profile, and that was just atrocious. So in this video, I'm using D-Cinelike, and in a custom setting, I had -2, -2, -2 for sharpness, contrast, and saturation. So this particular day was very overcast, so that we didn't have direct sunlight at all in the area. Though there was sun in parts of the area, not in the area around the site that I was filming at. And this site is known as, and I've been here before a number of times, so it's one of my favorite spots. This is known as the Harold Mill, or the Tintic Standard Reduction Mill, which is basically an abandoned mine processing facility. It was built in 1920 and only in operation from 1921 through 1925. So it's been abandoned for more than 90 years. In this video here, again, I'm using D-Cinelike, and exposure was a tough issue, but not as tough as it would be in some other cases. When you have sun filtering through clouds, as it is here, the sunlight that reaches the ground is very diffuse and almost like the clouds are a huge softbox. Now you can see over to the right, the sky is a little blown out. It's not terrible, but the brightness of the sky is going to be very high. When sunlight hits clouds like that, the clouds get really, really hot, and there's almost nothing you can do to keep that from blowing out. If you were to adjust the exposure so that the clouds were not blown out, you would hardly see the ground at all. It would be so dark. So you have to make a compromise. And this is maybe, I would probably prefer the exposure to be maybe 2/3 of a stop less than what it is here, given the sky condition. But again, that's a compromise you kind of have to make. When the sky is lit up like that, you can't expose for the sky and expect the ground to be viewable. It's just not possible. All right, well, here we haven't yet got a view of the abandoned mine processing facility, and that'll come here shortly. We're actually heading south along a stream that is part of the Warm Springs. This area is known as the Warm Springs Mountain area, and the streams are in fact warm. I was in the area about a month ago, and it was a cold day, but there were a couple of girls in their early 20s in bikinis in one of the springs. So now that I've turned away from the sun, and the blown out sky isn't as significant a factor in the image, even though the exposure is unchanged, it now is more appropriate for the scene. The blown out sky is a much less relevant portion of the field of view, so you can get by with this type of exposure, and that's perfectly fine. And now as I'm turning away from it, you can actually turn the exposure up a little bit more. That's kind of the thing you have to keep in mind. Okay, and then here's the mine processing facility, the Harold Mill, or Tintic Standard Reduction Mill. And this is a very popular place, particularly in the weekends. Photographers and videographers like myself. But you also get groups of kids, 4, 5, 6, 10 or more. And not just kids, come out and they dress up and they make their own little movies and whatnot. It's just a fun place. Yes, that's my phone. So, the Phantom 4 Pro, like all of the newer DJI drones, are simply phenomenal aerial platforms. As much as I complain about the cameras, and particularly the image processing, as an aerial platform, as a flying platform, DJI simply has the competition beat hands down. It's not even close. And they're aggressively pushing, new sensor technology, additional obstacle avoidance technology. They're really pushing the envelope in order to keep the competition behind them. So you have to give them props for what they do on a aerial platform standpoint, even if their image processing leaves something to be desired. So here we are at the mine processing facility, and the exposure here is again unchanged from what it was from the beginning, but given the fact that I'm now pointing almost directly away from the sun, I should be able to increase the exposure by probably 2/3 or 1 full stop. And I think I do that here in a minute. Notice the color and saturation levels. With it dark like that, the colors tend to stand out more. Okay, here I do the exposure compensation, increasing the exposure a little bit. I think I go a little bit more. There I go. And notice as I increase the exposure, I've done nothing with the saturation, but the saturation seems to have gone down just a bit. It's just a relative thing with the brightness level. Saturation's unchanged, it just appears less. And this is actually more appropriate for the conditions of the lighting here. This is a flying technique or photographing technique where you do a pullback and a climb at the same time, and it tends to keep the image in the center or in the same place in the field of view. Now I think you can see there's 4 people in the background there, all dressed in kind of dark clothing, and they were filming a little private home movie kind of thing. And that's me in the bottom sort of right, moving to the center. Here's another flying technique where you do a moving forward and a descending movement. So again, you tend to keep an object of interest in the field of view while you're doing that. So descending and moving forward, ascending and moving backwards. And even if you're not, out flying to make a more cinematic type of video, it's a good thing to practice moves like that so that when you do want to make something a little more cinematic, or you just want to be a little more serious about making a video that you want to show to people, having some practice using flying techniques and video techniques is a useful thing, because when you need it, you need to have that kind of muscle memory to be able to do it. Another kind of tip I would make here is do not slew the drone left and right and tilt the camera up and down in fast movements continuously. It's annoying, and it can actually make people nauseous, sick. Actually, make them sick. You want to tend to do things slower, more fluid. In a lot of scenes in a video, you might want basically a straight line motion of the video so that you don't have any turning in it. But a video would be boring if that's all you had. So you need to include turning and panning movements as well, tilting up and down movements as well. But you don't want to make those the central aspect of the video. Again, it just looks too busy. So this is the raw video, the entire flight. So I wouldn't be expecting to include all of this video in a sort of finished product. You know, this flight was almost 20 minutes, and I might expect to make a video in the 3 or 4 minutes or something like that from that. So you would take a piece here, a piece there, and so some of the movements that you make, if you do a quick turn, which you wouldn't want to include in the final output, you can edit that out. Below, and just about moving to the bottom now, is the rail line, I think narrow gauge rail line that they use to transport the ore from the mines to this mine processing facility. And I think the closest mine is about 8 or so miles to the west, and the tracks continue. There's more than one, probably as far as about 15 miles or maybe even a bit further than that. So think of the infrastructure they built for this mine processing facility, the railroad track to move the ore and the like, and the place was only in operation for like 4 years. One of the benefits of the newer cameras, and again, I've complained a lot about them, but they have increased the bit rate to 100 megabits per second, and I think that's done a world of good in reducing the blockiness that you can often get with very highly compressed video of like trees and branches and such, which tend to block up. And with more bit rate available to you, that's less of a problem. So again, an overcast day, no direct sunlight, but the upside to that is you get very, very even lighting. Again, from that kind of soft box effect. I moved into the Salt Lake area about 10 years ago, so my first trip to this place, the Harold Mill, was about 10 years ago. And at the time I first came here, the amount of inking or graffiti on the place was... There was some graffiti on it back then, but not nearly what we have now. In fact, I would say we have 3 or 4 times as much graffiti as was on the place just 10 years ago. So off to the bottom left corner here, you can see the 2 cars. My car is the second one. It's actually a Ford Focus, 2012 Ford Focus, Sonic Blue. Love that little car. So, pointing at the ground here in an area where you don't have, the bright patch of sky, you can increase the exposure. And again, one of the reasons I'm doing this video and showing you the whole thing is that you can see the adjustments I make real time. And you'll have to do that, I think, if you're serious about this, to make adjustments to your exposure. And then in editing, you don't want to show in your video the scene changing in brightness, so you would edit out that area and have a transition of sorts to prevent that. And now, looking towards the sky, it's a little bright. So then you turn the exposure down. This is just kind of the thing you have to kind of keep in mind. And the way I did the exposure here, just to kind of be complete about it, I had the aperture set at f6.3. The ISO was set at 100. So my exposure control was through shutter speed. It was fully manual, so I was using manual exposure control. So basically I was just changing the shutter speed. And I think I ranged from 100-ish to like 400-ish or something like that. I don't recall exactly, but in that range. And there's the 4 kids that were there playing make-believe. So again, on the exposure, I just reduced it a little bit more, and that's because the sky is now a more prominent portion of the field of view. Earlier, when I was just a little sliver of the sky there, you would have a higher exposure to make the foreground stand out a little bit better, and you can tolerate a little bit of blowing out if it's a smaller portion of the field of view. But when you have as much of the field of view as of the sky as this is here, then you kind of want to balance a little bit more to prevent the sky from being so obviously blown. A professional, filmmaker or video, movie maker, they would do masking of sorts to do differential compensation for the sky versus the ground. As an amateur, without the time or resources to do that, you could spend 100 hours of editing for every hour of footage, easily. That's not in my budget. Alright, so tilting or turning away from the sun, and now the exposure looks a little dark. And you can see the saturation is really pretty high at this point. The colors are a little bit exaggerated. So here in a second, I increase the exposure once again. And notice the saturation, relative saturation level change as I do that. All right. Again, all I did was increase the exposure, and now the saturation level is actually just about spot on. All right, getting close to the end of the first flight. And by now my remote is starting to beep. Or actually, yes, it's the DJI Go app is starting to beep because I'm below 30%. So I pretty quickly get her on the ground. So turn away. And on the ground. end of first flight, and beginning of second flight. Again, as an aerial platform, the smoothness of the later generation DJI drones is pretty remarkable. Combination of the smarts in the controller for flying the plane, and obviously the gimbal assembly to keep the camera level and smooth. You think about what the major cinematographers and movie houses would have spent for this type of capability even a decade ago. We're talking 5 figures, easy. Now, one other thing to note here is you'll notice I have not had any tilted horizon problems. And when this is unedited, complete footage from start to finish of the first flight and now beginning of the second flight, and you can notice that the horizon is just perfect. Part of that is due to having a good IMU and gimbal calibration on a level surface. So if you've got problems with tilted horizon, you may want to look into doing a IMU and gimbal calibration and make sure you do it on a level surface and not a wobbly surface either. You want it a hard surface that isn't moving around about. The other factor for maintaining a level horizon is going easy on the sticks. If you're trying to play fighter jockey here, doesn't matter how well you've calibrated things, your horizon is going to get skewed. So go easy on the sticks. And here again, you look at the trees and the weeds and the like, you don't see any of the blocking up that you do with video that's overly compressed. I mentioned this is a warm spring area, so the water here you would imagine to be warmer than it would be without a warm spring feeding into it. But you can also see there's a thin skin of ice on top in places. Not over the entire surface, but in good portions of it. There's already a thin skin of ice on it. So yeah, this may be the desert, but the desert can get awful cold too. All right, and again, an exposure change, increasing the exposure. And I think I just went about 1/3 of a stop too far. But when you're pointed down and you have eliminated elements in your field of view that are very highly exposed, then you can increase the exposure for the rest of the image, because you don't have areas that are going to blow out if you do that. But again, I think I went about 1/3 of a stop too far in this particular scene, and I believe I correct that here in a minute or two. Knock it down about 1/3 of a stop, and you'll notice it improves the color, and the tonal balance is better. About 1/3 of a stop less than where I have it right now. There you go. That, I think, is a better tonal balance. I do have a little bit more sky in there, of course, but I think the weeds have a nice, more richer color to them here. And it only took a third of a stop difference in the exposure. So for folks who are, say new to drones or new to videography and maybe unsure of technique and the like, this is what you do. You go out and you fly and you make changes, and then you review what those changes accomplished. And you're not going to nail it on the first time. You're just not. But through experience and trial and error and sort of being a little bit more methodical about it, you can get a better handle on things. And it, even with the limitations of DJI's piss poor image processing, the hardware, the tools they have provided are very good. So a lot of it is learning to make the most of what they provide you and getting around the limitations of the hardware where that's an issue. But in this case, I think it's mostly a limitation of DJI's software in doing image processing. Okay, now I got a little bit of sky in the top right-hand corner, but it's a small portion of the sky. Now getting a little bit larger portion of the sky. And you can see it's blown out, but not terribly so. Probably would want to reduce the exposure a little bit to be more balanced between the ground and the sky. But it depends on what's most important to you. Again, cut the exposure down. The sky looks better. Maybe a little dark for the ground. You see the ducks there in the bottom right hand corner. Notice they're not like scurrying to get away from me. It's one of the nice things about these smaller drones is that their sound footprint is fairly tolerable by wildlife. You do not want to be chasing wildlife with a drone. Please don't be that guy. But if you happen to be flying over an area where there is wildlife, the rule of thumb is give them some distance so that you're not right on top of them. But the other thing to do is probably best not to just hover there beside them. If you're flying in a direction, just keep flying so that you don't, just kind of hover there. But again, these smaller drones, these modern smaller drones, have a pretty small sound footprint. I mean, you can hear them from maybe a quarter mile away if the wind conditions are right, but they're not loud. It's you just hear it. And against road noise, cars driving on a road a half a mile away, the drone at a couple hundred meters is less noticeable than the cars driving on the road a half a mile away. So a slow, steady hand on the sticks, and I'm almost 30 minutes into this video, and my horizons are just fine. I have no problems with my horizons. So turning away from the sun can increase the exposure. There you go. That was one full stop increase. Notice here also that you don't see any really bad sharpening halos. Like I said, in the custom setting for this, I set the sharpness at -2. And in Premiere Pro, I used 30 as my sharpening value. And that seems to be, excuse me, phone again. And 30 in Premiere Pro seems to be about the right value to provide good sharpening without any, obvious haloing, which can be annoying. Now, I'm not sure what that little skewing up of the video was there, but it was there in the raw video as well. So I've already increased the exposure one full stop from when I was flying in the general direction of the sun. So that's one full stop brighter than it was in that direction. Now I'm heading almost directly away from the sun, and increase the exposure some more. And I think that's about the right exposure. The colors don't pop quite as much as they do when you have the exposure a little lower. And, for some people, if you're looking for that as an effect, a particular artistic effect, then you could either reduce the exposure or boost the saturation. I used, I think, about 115 in the saturation level in Premiere Pro. Again, in camera, I had that as a -2 for saturation. Here's another technique where you're moving forward and tilting down to keep an area in the field of view. Wasn't done very nicely there, but it's one of those things. Again, one of those things you practice a little bit to try to put that into muscle memory. And now I'm doing a climb, basically a straight up climb, and I'm looking almost straight down. In fact, I think I am looking straight down. And in a second, I begin to do a clockwise. Here we go. Turn. And you'll notice here at the end, I get so close to nailing this, but I'm like 2 degrees off. I went about 2 degrees too far. So close. But again, that's the kind of thing you practice, even if you're not, intending to do anything with the, the flight that you're on. Just kind of practice that kind of stuff. Another technique to do is a pull back and a tilt up. And you'll notice that the place is almost dead center in the field of view, but I'm moving backwards and tilting up at the same time. That's a very useful technique. And that, again, relates to the slowness, the smoothness of it. You don't want to do jerky motions. But if you see something and you want to have the camera pointed to that quickly, go ahead and slew over it quickly to do that. And then in your final video, you edit out the quick jerky motion so that you don't see that in the video. So you don't have to be rock steady smooth all the time, because you can edit that out in the video of the video. So we're coming pretty close to the end of the video here, and I did a pullback, and now I'm going to be coming back in. So I hope this video gives you a little bit more confidence in the ability to get some good quality video in spite of DJI's abysmal image processing skills. The hardware is there, I think, and not using D-Log, but using D-Cinelike, none, or possibly art as your color profiles, and being careful with your exposure and adjusting that in flight. I would recommend manual exposure. Just you have greater control, and in this case here, exposure was totally controlled by shutter speed. You could, of course, change exposure by changing the aperture, but you don't generally want to push the aperture up much above about f7.1 due to diffraction limiting. So really the sweet spot for the aperture is about f4, or maybe even a little bit faster than that, up to about f7.1. All right, that's the end of the flight. Thank you for watching.